Welcome to the Magical Man Cave. This place is my absolute pride and joy. I've spent a lot of time, effort and money making it as immersive as possible. But I wonder whether my little slice of magic can stand toe-to-toe with the giants. I'm talking about Disney and Universal and the whole might of their Imagineering and their illusions and their set making. And so I hopped on a plane to Florida to find out whether the Magical Man Cave can stand toe-to-toe with things like the Beacon Barrel, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, Battle at the Ministry, and all of the illusion, the immersion, the Imagineering that all of the collected might of the Americans have to offer against this little one-man scrappy deal in the Magical Man Cave, basically in my garage. It all started with a very, very long couple of days of travelling. And so I'm finally there. Yeah, I've changed my top. I'm going to be doing that a lot during the video because I bought a lot of tops, but you know, hey ho. While we're on the subject of t-shirts, check this out. If I turn off the lights, how cool is that? It glows in the dark. I like it anyway. Let's turn the lights back on. Whoop! So the first place I went was Disney for 2 weeks, and you've got to hand it to Disney. They are nice, like genuinely, welcomingly nice. And I would consider that a fairly wholesome trait. When we arrived at the Caribbean Beach Resort, the first thing they did was ask if we were celebrating something. And we said quite genuinely, yes, it's our 8-year anniversary. So they gave us this little badge that said happily ever after, which I think is really cute, but also it's a bit of a Disney code. Those people who know, whether they're cast members or guests, will know why you're there and why you're celebrating something. Either you're newly married or you're celebrating some sort of anniversary. And that's what happily ever after means. There's also first time visit and there's also birthdays as well. On those badges they then write the name happy birthday Jaden or whoever it is. And I think that's kind of cute because then even total strangers can go up to you and wish you congratulations or say, hey, happy birthday, Hannah, or whatever your name is. And I've seen that happen quite a lot, not only to me, but to other people. And throughout our whole 2-week stint, because we put the badges on our lanyards, because we're those sorts of Disney adults that we carry lanyards around with our passes on them, people could see that it was our anniversary just by having that happily ever after badge, and people would say, hey, congratulations, happy anniversary. And it wasn't just cast members, these were guests as well, and it gave you this sort of warm fuzzy feeling that you can't get at Universal. So points to Disney on that. So yeah, when we arrived at Disney, they didn't just wave us through, they welcomed us as friends, and they called us friends, which I think is something that's unique to Disney. They were like, hi friend, which is a little bit weird the first time you hear it, but I can imagine as a child that'd be quite a welcoming thing, because adults, especially strangers, can be quite scary creatures if you've never seen that person before. Then they gave us an anniversary badge to say that, yeah, we're celebrating our anniversary. Kind of cute. And that tiny gesture transformed the trip into something quite special. And so for the entire 2 weeks that we were there, because we had this little badge on our lanyards, cast members and even guests were going up to us and saying, congratulations, happy anniversary, because they knew that happy ever after meant that we were engaged or married or had some sort of anniversary thing. And it wasn't forced, it wasn't corporate, and we didn't pay any extra for that. It was just kind of a genuine thing. It probably cost Disney pennies to make these things, but it really made a difference to me and to my wife. It kind of felt like everyone was in the magic together, which I thought was kind of cool. And that's the thing about Disney, they absolutely get it on how to make you part of their story. And of course they obviously deserve a bit of credit for basically inventing audio animatronics. Walt Disney and his singing birds in the Tiki Room effectively kicked the whole thing off. So I think Ferdinand should thank Disney for basically doing that. Now the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. So let's start with the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And yes, it's big, it's bold, it's classic, and it's over 30 years old, so let's give it a bit of a break, shall we? But if we look at the candles and the sconces, they are unfortunately not flickering like this one is. So I've got to give props to the Magical Man Cave for that. Also, and it's not Disney's fault, this one. For the sake of safety, they've got exit signs. And I'm not going to blame Disney for this one because it's not really their fault. Because of legalities, they've got to have exit signs that kind of break the illusion, smoke detectors that kind of break the illusion, air conditioning vents and ducts that do kind of break the illusion. They've done their best to try and hide all of that sort of stuff, but I think props to the Magical Man Cave on this one. Next up, Haunted Mansion, which is again an absolute classic, probably one of my favourite ones in Magic Kingdom, and actually one of my favourite in the whole of Walt Disney World. But I don't think some of the illusions that they have there are the best that they've got on show in the whole of Walt Disney World. Not quite as clever as the Figment disappearing butterfly. In fact, even after around 26 years of knowing me, my wife was quite surprised when the butterfly disappeared, and she wasn't really sure how it was done. I do know how it's done. I'm not going to reveal it here. There are other videos that do that. But after over 25 years of me performing magic, she didn't know how it was done, and I think that's quite cool. But we're not talking about Figment, we're talking about the Haunted Mansion. Does this one really compare with the Magical Man Cave? I think it kind of does. But to be completely fair on this, the Haunted Mansion controls the angles of sight. In other words, all of the angles from which people are viewing these illusions are very tightly controlled within the Doom Buggy. So the Doom Buggy is the ride vehicle, and it encapsulates your head and also comes around the sides as well, meaning that your viewing window is quite restricted, and it also points you at certain places at certain angles. One of the things that we were told when we did the Keys to the Kingdom Magic Kingdom tour is that if you lean forward when you're watching all of those ghosts, you can actually see the feet of two audio animatronics dangling like this. As you lean forward, they're actually just above you, and you can see them just sort of dangling like this. And that's the way the Pepper's Ghost illusion works on the chandelier in the dancing ghost ballroom scene. So yes, it's very effective from your Doom Buggy, but if you know how to overcome that illusion, you still can. I would say that maybe we should give this a bit of a draw. Disney 1, Magical Man Cave 1. I think the illusions here definitely do match up with the Haunted Mansion. I think on some occasions though, the Magical Man Cave probably pips it as well. The moving portrait in particular I think is significantly better. The moving portrait in the Magical Man Cave I think pips the Haunted Mansion, which only has sort of static images, which then when there's lightning effects, they sort of change into something horrific momentarily. That said, the Haunted Mansion's hollow face illusion is definitely something that I want to build into the Magical Man Cave, so I would say it's fairly evenly matched between these two. Next up is the Beak and Barrel Pub, and I'm also going to combine this with Das Steakhouse at Universal's Epic Universe. I would say that on the whole, both pubs are fairly much of a muchness. They're both quite overcrowded, but Das Steakhouse definitely takes it on that one. Now obviously I can't really compete with 3 meters by 6 meters compared to the Beak and Barrel's footage, or even Das Steakhouse, which is much, much bigger. But what I can do is to say both of the Disney and Universal pubs don't have flickering candles like I've got. They don't have the same sort of attention to detail in terms of texture. They've got sort of concrete, but they haven't got this sort of texturized wall. I don't think either the Beak and Barrel or Das Steakhouse has the sort of rich colours that I've got here. And I don't know whether that's just because of timing. I mean, this obviously took me a very, very long time, and that's only 3 meters by 6 meters. If I was to expand this into a Universal or a Disney pub, again, it would probably take a little bit too much time, and maybe I wouldn't be able to get the same sort of effect. But again, I think the Magical Man Cave really takes it on decor. So what about entertainment in both of these places? Well, Das Steakhouse has good decor, and the lights do sometimes change. They go a little bit red sometimes, but they don't really stay that for very long, which I think is probably good, by the way, because if you're eating your food, you don't particularly want it to stay bright red, because you kind of want to see what you're eating. In the Beak and Barrel, they do have certain things on a bit of a rolling timescale, like the mermaids that sing to you, almost like a siren call. They have 2 ships in bottles that have a battle. I think I've mentioned that before. That's very cool, that's very neat. They've also got a bottle of rum that depletes and then fills back up again. They've even got Pegleg Pete, which is an audio animatronic that walks out, talks to people, and then walks back in again. He says, "Drink up, my hearties," and everyone yells, "Yo ho." It's quite good fun, but he only says a certain number of things, whereas Ferdinand says pretty much infinite things. I can expand him infinitely. Now again, Disney doesn't have the sort of budget or time to record 1,000,001 different things, and neither should they have to, because those sorts of visitors aren't going to be watching this over and 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 over. There might be 1 or 2 who have far too much money and time. Generally speaking, most guests aren't going to want to do that. However, in the Magical Man Cave, I kind of do, which means I need to record more things for Ferdinand to say so it doesn't get boring. In Epic Universe, they do have talking portraits, which by the look of things, and I can't guarantee that I'm right on this, by the look of things they're a little bit more adaptive. They use AI, they use three-dimensional modelling techniques to give their moving portraits more character and respond to wand flicks and all of those sorts of things. I don't think they're particularly well done. They're not brilliantly well rendered. They're obviously constrained a little bit by the technology at the moment, but they're quite good. I would still say that the Magical Man Cave pips it on this one, just because of the way that I can control pretty much everything to my liking. Now, I know that I'm not controlling it for everybody, maybe not everyone's going to like it. I think if I was being generous to Disney and Universal, I'd probably give them a draw, but I think the Magical Man Cave takes it on this. And so, on to the final category, price. Now, it depends on how you look at this, because I've probably spent about £7,500, maybe £8,000 on this Magical Man Cave so far. If I was to say that that's how much you would need to spend to get to the Beacon Barrel level, I would imagine that it's probably more for the Beacon Barrel than it is for here, because you've got to pay for employees, you've got to pay for all of those sorts of materials and designing it and all of those sorts of things. I would say that that's probably going to cost more than £8,000 to do everything that they've done there. Probably by quite a lot, actually. So I think I probably take it myself. I don't know, and it's very difficult for me to say. That said, if you're already in Florida, how much will it cost to go to the Beacon Barrel? Effectively, it's only a couple of £100 because you'd need to pay for drinks and maybe some food and maybe a park ticket. So from that point of view, Disney have it. What about Das Steakhouse? Similar sort of thing. So I think I'm going to have to give this one a draw. It's kind of difficult for me to do that. The holiday over to America from the UK certainly cost more than the Man Cave did. It's a difficult one for me. I think on the whole, the Magical Man Cave probably takes that. But I'm going to be generous on this one and call it a draw. So there you have it. That's the scoring out of the way. I think that's quite a surprise to everybody, including and especially me. So for those of you who don't know, audio animatronics are basically a thing that brings the Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion kind of to life. And it's those special moments that I'm trying to bring to life in the Magical Man Cave too. You know the sorts of moments. The ships in the bottle battle at the Beacon Barrel. Try saying that 3 times fast.
Ships in the bottle battle at the Beacon Barrel. Ships in the bottle battle.
Anyway. So when I built the Man Cave, I tried to sneak in that same sort of sense of magic and fun and wonder into everything that I've done here as well. Next up is Universal. So everyone expects Battle at the Ministry to be the greatest ride on the planet. And honestly, some people say it is. And I have to agree that it is probably the best ride that Universal have. But there's a massive caveat with that. It is a beast of a ride. It's huge, it's cinematic, it's dramatic, but there's a huge problem. I'll come on to what that problem is in just a moment, but some say that Monsters Unchained is better. I disagree, and don't get me wrong, Monsters Unchained is a great ride. It is still great. The queue line in particular and the pre-show are both really well done. They're not quite at Battle of the Ministry level yet, so far, but they are very well done. It's still top tier. The one thing that Monsters Unchained has that the Battle at the Ministry doesn't is their wait time. 15 minutes for Monsters Unchained, even through the normal standby lane, versus an express time, yes, an express time of 1 hour 30 minutes for Battle at the Ministry. Don't get me wrong, that queue was great, there was an awful lot to look at, and I didn't really feel too bored in it. But my feet were starting to ache, and if I didn't have the express passes, I'd be waiting over 5 hours for one ride. Now, in all likelihood, you're probably not going to want to go to a park for much more than about 5 or 6 hours anyway. There are some people who do the rope drop and stay right until the fireworks at the end. If you do that, you're likely to get on 2 rides, or 2 equivalent rides anyway, or Battle of the Ministry twice. I don't think that's very good value, because the ride itself is less than a couple of minutes long. Is it worth it? Is it worth staying around, hanging around and waiting for 5.5 hours? I don't think so. The thing is that the Battle at the Ministry is vast, it's huge. The scale is something totally other that I would never be able to do in my dizziest daydreams. But while Disney and Universal transport millions of people to other worlds, this place doesn't have to. It just needs to transport me, and I guess you if you want to come with me. And the Gobble Inn, my Magical Man Cave, does exactly that. Every switch, every sound effect, every puff of scent, every lightning strike, it does exactly what it needs to do. It transports me to a magical world of my own making. It's my kind of version of the same sort of magic. And honestly, when you strip away the crowds and the queues and the corporate polish, what's left? The feeling you get standing here away from the woes of the world and surrounded by all of this is that same sort of joy. It's just a little bit more personal to me. Notably, at Universal, both Battle at the Ministry and Monsters Unchained both had broken audio animatronics. Now don't get me wrong, Disney isn't immune to this either. In fact, we actually got walked off the Ratatouille ride in Epcot when it all broke down. Like everything, absolutely everything broke down. And here's the footage to prove it. Now this happens, these sorts of rides are insanely complex. Sometimes little things go wrong, like Mama Odin in Tiana's Bayou Adventure. By the way, pretty much every Mama Odin audio animatronic wasn't working, and I think they had about 3 or maybe even 4 of those. None of them worked. So I would consider 1 animatronic, maybe 2 or even 3 to be fairly minor. But then you've got big screens as well that sometimes go down too. So like I say, I know that these rides are incredibly complex and sometimes things happen and you're just going to have to shut down the ride. I get that. It does happen on pretty much every park. Pretty much every day is going to have at least one ride that is having a problem. But I will say it did seem to happen more often at Universal than it did at Disney. And speaking of Disney, do you remember when I said that Disney just seemed nicer? Well, that really stood out to me when we did the backstage tour. It's called Keys to the Kingdom in Magic Kingdom. Now sadly, I don't have any footage from that tour whatsoever because we're just not allowed to film anything behind the scenes. But I'll tell you what was quite funny, was when we were walking through the Utilidors, which is basically the basement of Magic Kingdom. It was genuinely fascinating, and unfortunately there wasn't as much Imagineering in that tour as I had hoped for, but it was genuinely interesting to see the Disney princesses walking around in grey jumpsuits, for example. I thought that was really quite funny. They still had their full makeup and their hairdos and everything, but they were just wearing grey. So on the ground level, on the first story of the Magic Kingdom, that's essentially the utility areas, the doors, the backstage areas. And so the second story, or the first story if you're in the UK, first floor, is essentially the whole set, the whole park, all of the rides, all of the visitor areas. Those are on the second story up from essentially the basement. The surprise winner for me though was Universal's Transformers ride, which was very understated. No one was really ever talking about it, but I went into the queue, which was surprisingly short, and then I went on this really immersive ride with a great storyline, great effects, and actually made you feel like you were there. Really immersive, great ride. But what really surprised me was how well this magical man cave stood up against the best in the world. So yeah, after spending 3 weeks in Florida surrounded by the best entertainment that the world has to offer, you would think that coming home to the Magical Man Cave, opening that door and seeing this surrounding, it would leave me feeling a bit flat. But here's the thing, it just doesn't. Because I walked back into this man cave, it's a 3 metre by 6 metre garage basically that I converted myself, and it really holds up against the best in the world. Now I know I'm biased and obviously I don't have billion-dollar budgets. And I also don't have an army of engineers or Imagineers. It's just me. But what I do have is the same obsession with detail and immersion, and I think it comes through really well here. I love storytelling. Obviously I've got a YouTube channel which I'm hoping I'm conveying the same sort of conversational tone that I do face to face. But whether it's the fireplace that smells like chocolate or my talking skull, I think that I've captured a very similar sort of feel to the best in the world. I would say that this Magical Man Cave can hold up against those. It's better than some, it's not as good as others, but I would say on the whole, I'm definitely up there. And I know that's a really unpopular thing to do, is to say how great I am. But I'd love to know what you think about it down in the comments, because when you strip away the crowds and the queues and all of the corporate nonsense, what you're left with is ultimately something very magical and something very personal to me, but I hope you enjoy it as well. So what's your favourite ride at Disney or Universal, and do you think that this Magical Man Cave can match up to it? Or does match up to it, probably more importantly. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I will be back next time with some more magical awesomeness, but until next time, as always,
Play magical.